What is it that makes a writer truly immortal? How does a name manage to survive not just for a few hundred years, but for millennia, and still be spoken with this incredible reverence? Well, today we're diving into the life, the legend, and the absolutely mind-blowing genius of a man who is, without a doubt, the greatest poet and playwright of ancient India, Kalidasa. Let's try and unravel this incredible story together.
To really get a sense of Kalidasa's impact, we don't even have to start in India. Let's travel to 18th century Germany. One of Europe's absolute literary titans, Goethe, gets his hands on a translation of Kalidasa's most famous play, Shakuntala. And he was just floored, completely captivated, so much so that he wrote this verse. Now, this wasn't just a nice review. This was one master tipping his hat to another across huge gaps in time and culture. It cemented Kalidasa's place as a giant of world literature.
Now, you'll often hear Kalidasa called the Shakespeare of India. And look, that's meant as the highest possible compliment, right? It's really just a way for us to wrap our heads around how important he was. Just like Shakespeare is seen as the absolute pinnacle of the English language, Kalidasa holds that exact same spot in classical Sanskrit. But honestly, a lot of people would say he doesn't need the comparison at all. His work, as you're about to see, is in a league of its own. So, where did this incredible, once-in-a-civilization genius even come from? Well, the actual history is pretty thin. But the legend gives us a story that's so wild it feels like it could have been one of his own plays. It's this dramatic, romantic story of transformation that tries to explain how a totally ordinary man was touched by the divine. Our story kicks off with this really formidable character, Princess Vidyotama. Her name literally means foremost among the learned, and boy did she live up to it. She was so brilliant, so sharp, that she made a vow. She would only marry a man who could beat her in a battle of wits. And one by one, she just wiped the floor with every scholar who dared to challenge her. So you can imagine, the court scholars were not happy. They were humiliated, they were furious, and they decided they were going to get revenge. Their plan? It was cruel but simple. Trick the princess into marrying the biggest fool they could possibly find. And wouldn't you know it, they found the perfect guy. A handsome young shepherd sitting on a tree branch, sawing off the very section he was sitting on. Yep, they knew they had their man. So the courtiers bring this shepherd to the princess, and they tell him, don't say a word, just use hand gestures. The debate starts, and this is where it gets hilarious. The princess holds up one finger, right, symbolizing that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is one. The shepherd thinks she's threatening to poke out his eye, so he holds up two fingers, like, I'll poke out both yours. But the princess sees this and thinks it's a brilliant philosophical point, that the divine is both the individual soul and the universal spirit. Amazing. Then she holds up her open palm for the 5 elements. He thinks she's going to slap him, so he makes a fist, like he's going to punch her back. And she's just blown away, interpreting it as the 5 elements being nothing until controlled by one mind. She was completely convinced he was a genius and agreed to marry him right away. Of course, the wedding happens, but a lie like that can't last forever. Pretty soon, Princess Vidyotama discovers the awful truth. Her husband isn't some silent sage. He's a complete illiterate. Absolutely heartbroken and just deeply ashamed, she throws him out of the palace, telling him to never, ever come back until he was a truly learned man. And this is the real turning point of the story. I mean, can you imagine the despair? Rejected, shamed, and outcast? How on earth do you go from that absolute rock bottom to becoming the most celebrated poet of your entire civilization? The legend gives us a single, powerful answer. Driven to the edge, the shepherd goes to a temple of the goddess Kali and just starts praying with this raw, desperate honesty. The story goes that he was about to take his own life when the goddess, moved by his pure heart, appeared and gave him her blessing. In an instant, she granted him profound knowledge, wit, and unbelievable poetic skill. He was totally reborn. And in that moment, he took a new name to honor her, Kalidasa, which means the servant of Kali. Okay, so with this divine gift, the legend of the man starts to fade into the background, and the tangible, awe-inspiring reality of his work takes center stage. Because while we can debate the story of his origins, the brilliance of what he wrote is not up for debate at all. We have 7 of his works that have survived, and every single one is considered a masterpiece. And just look at the sheer range of his talent. He wasn't a one-trick pony. He wrote across so many different genres.
You've got these two grand epic poems, Raghuvamsham, which is the sweeping history of a dynasty, and Kumara Sambhavam, which tells the story of the birth of a god. Then you have these two beautiful, intimate lyric poems, including the incredibly famous Meghadutam, the Cloud Messenger. And on top of all that, 3 plays, from a fun, light-hearted court romance to a tragic love story between a mortal and a celestial nymph, and of course, the big one, his most famous work, Abhijñānaśākuntalam. This is the play that just blew Gota's mind. It's this beautiful story of love that's found, then lost because of a curse, and then found again. A king falls in love with a girl who lives in the forest, but a grumpy sage curses him to forget all about her. The only thing that can restore his memory is a royal ring, which, of course, she loses. When Sir William Jones translated this back in 1789, it was like opening a door for the West. For European audiences, the deep psychology, the way it blended human emotion with the natural world, it was a total revelation. It basically changed world literature forever. So, we've got these incredible works and this fantastic legend, but who was the man who wrote them? Now it's time to peel back all those layers of myth and try to figure out what history can actually tell us. And this is the central puzzle, the question that has fascinated and frankly frustrated scholars for centuries. When you start looking for hard facts, things get really blurry, really fast. We have the art, but the artist himself is a total enigma. It's kind of wild that a man this famous left behind almost zero trace of his own life. Yeah, even this simple question of when he lived is up for a huge debate. Some scholars argue for the 1st century BCE, but the most popular theory, the one you'll hear most often, places him in the 4th to 5th century CE, right in the middle of the golden age of the Gupta Empire. They think he was probably a court poet for the great king Chandragupta II. But here's the thing, we don't know for sure. The first rock-solid proof we have that he even existed is an inscription from 634 CE, and it talks about him like he was already an old legend. So he was famous by the 7th century at least. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more complicated, there's this really fascinating controversy, the theory of multiple Kalidasas. Some scholars look at the different styles in the 7 masterpieces and suggest that they weren't written by one man. They think it could have been 2 or maybe even 3 different authors, all writing under the famous name Kalidasa. The idea is that the name might have become more of a title, like a seal of literary quality, instead of just referring to one guy. So in the end, we're left with this man who is both a legend and a complete mystery. But you know what? Regardless of all the historical debates, his ultimate legacy is undeniable. It's a legacy that wasn't written in stone, but in immortal verse, that people are still reading and performing and falling in love with, almost 2,000 years later. So let's bring this all home. Here are the 5 key things to remember about Kalidasa. First, he's considered the absolute goat of ancient Indian poets and playwrights. Second, his life story is wrapped up in this incredible legend of divine transformation from a simple shepherd. Third, he left us 7 surviving masterpieces, poems, and plays. Fourth, the actual historical person is a total mystery. We're still debating when he lived, or even if he was just one person. And finally, number 5, his work, especially Shakuntala, was this massive cultural bridge that introduced the beauty of Sanskrit literature to the entire world. And that kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. Does the fact that we know so little about the man, the historical Kalidasa, does that take away from the magic of his work? Or does the mystery, all that space that's filled in by legend and speculation, actually add another layer of wonder to the immortal words he left behind? I guess that's a question only his poetry can really answer.